After working hard for half my life, I finally saved enough to buy a house with my husband. Just as we were about to pay, I accidentally overheard my husband's thoughts. Once we buy this house, Gina and I will have a place for our future married life. Stop dawdling, my son is waiting outside. My husband and I have been married for years without kids, and Gina, he mentioned, is my cousin. Turns out, they've been sneaking around behind my back and even have a son together. This year is my 36th birthday, and it's also the day my husband and I plan to buy a house. John and I have been married for over a decade, and we've always been stable. All these years, we lived in different cities, working hard to afford our own house. I worked in a factory in a big city down south, and he drove a taxi back home. I was actually supposed to stay home, but when Betty fell ill, John took care of her so I wouldn't have to. We had already chosen a house, and as soon as we walked in, someone guided us through the process. Soon, it was time for the final payment. I managed to save 600,000 yuan over these years, and with John's savings of over 100,000, we were just about to afford the down payment for a prime city center location. I didn't get much education. I left school before graduating middle school. Years of real-world experience taught me to be very cautious in everything I do. John saw me staring at the contract and sneered, "You think they'll cheat us? Acting all educated when you can't even read much." I ignored his grumbling and read through everything carefully. Ever since I returned home a few months ago, John's attitude shifted from friendly to impatient. I was upset at first, but the thought of having our own house made the small annoyances fade. Then, I heard an inappropriate voice. "Stop pretending and hurry up with the signature. Gina's waiting outside. I don't even know how our son is doing. As soon as the property's ours, put it under my son's name immediately." I was stunned for a moment after hearing the familiar name. I looked skeptically at John sitting across from me. Realizing he hadn't spoken, I suppressed my suspicions and gently put down the contract. John thought I was finally going to sign and his eyes lit up. "You're going to sign?" I shook my head. "I need to use the restroom." "Such a fuss, hurry up," he muttered, clearly displeased. I paid no mind to John's grumbling and quickly walked to the bathroom. Once inside a stall, I finally started to calm down. But even then, I couldn't stop sweating, and my body felt cold. If what I overheard were true, signing the contract would mean the house would be his. John and Betty's family once convinced me, "You're a couple, so whose name it's under doesn't matter." Under their continuous persuasion, I relented. After all, I married John for so many years and had basic trust in him. Yet now, an unexpected revelation hit me. I seemed to hear John's inner thoughts, and that's when I realized Betty's family had planned this all along. Gina, John's mentioned woman, is my uncle's daughter, about my age and a single mom. It seems John was referring to Gina's son as ours. Recalling what I knew about Gina, I realized whenever she mentioned her son, she was vague, so everyone eventually stopped asking. Gina returned 8 years ago with a baby Richard after being kicked out by our uncle for her unwed pregnancy. With no choice, she came to me for help. I had to leave for work in another city, so I left her in John's care. Piecing it all together, I felt like I was falling into an ice pit. I'd worked so hard all these years for our future, only to learn that John had been having an affair with my cousin. I wasn't sure if Richard was John's son, but knowing him, he wouldn't be raising someone else's kid unless he was his. In my chaotic thoughts, I heard a knock on the stall door. "Ms. Jenny, is everything all right?" It was a staff member's voice. I glanced at my phone and realized an hour had passed, and John had called me countless times. Composing myself, I stepped out and apologized to the staff. "Sorry, I'm not feeling well. Can we come back another day to pay?" She kindly smiled. "Of course, Ms. Jenny. Health is important." John looked impatient as I left the restroom. Seeing me, he tried to mask his annoyance with a smile. "Let's go, let's pay now," he said, coming towards me. I looked at the man I had been married to for over a decade, feeling he was a stranger for the first time. We met in a factory. I had been working for a couple of years after dropping out of middle school, and he was there because he couldn't get into high school. As a newcomer, he was assigned to work under me. Over time, we grew closer and eventually got married the next year. Sure, there was love between us, but over the years, it probably got worn out by life. No wonder he strayed, even having a kid with someone else. Seeing I wasn't speaking, John felt awkward, reaching out to me. I avoided his touch. I turned away coldly. I don't feel well. Let's pay another day. With that, I walked out, not looking back. He stood stunned, his face darkening out of my sight as I heard his inner voice again. Wasting my time, not paying after hours of nonsense. That old woman should look at herself, can't compare to Gina at all. Years of toil made me look a decade older than my peers, obviously not as well maintained as Gina. Even though we're about the same age, it felt like we were from different generations. I didn't wait for John and got on the bus home by myself. Through the window, I saw Gina and her son standing not far away, waiting. Unlike the forced happiness he showed in front of me, John now was completely filled with genuine happiness. Watching them lovingly hold Richard, my heart ached painfully. What a cozy family of three they were. I remember back then, I also had a child. When I first married John, I wasn't pregnant for a while, which made Betty quite resentful. It wasn't until our 8th year of marriage that I finally got pregnant with our first child, and the whole family was overjoyed. Betty went all out to nourish me. When I was 6 months along, she brought some remedy she heard would ensure a son and insisted I drink it. Then, the unexpected happened. That night, my stomach hurt severely. We rushed to the hospital, but I lost the baby. This incident nearly shattered my relationship with Betty, and it has never truly recovered over the years. For me, the gender didn't matter. I only wanted a healthy baby. But because of this, I was left unable to have more children. Seeing my husband with another woman, looking like a family, was like thousands of knives piercing through my heart. I didn't think I'd done anything wrong to John and Gina, yet they betrayed me and even had a child together. Maybe my expression gave me away. The lady next to me handed me a pack of tissues. When I glanced at my reflection in the window, I saw my eyes, red and full of tears. When I got home, John wasn't back yet. Betty saw me and greeted me with a smile. Finished shopping? Where's the house deed? I shook my head. I'm not feeling well. Let's talk another day. I walked straight to my room, ignoring her reaction. Betty was stunned for a second and tried to block my path, ranting. You only say you're unwell at such a crucial time. I heard that the houses in that area sell fast. Don't mess up something so important for our family. I contained my irritation. It's my money. I'll pay when I choose to. Are you really going to speak to me like that? Betty was taken aback, clearly not expecting me, usually so good-natured, to snap back. Her face turned sour before she forced a smile and took my hand. Blame Mom for her harsh words. Jenny, don't be mad. Rest if you're not feeling well, and let me know if you need anything. I pulled my hand away. No need. I'd like to rest. Seeing I was not giving her any face, Betty walked away, pouting. Thinking of John and Betty's ugly faces, I was glad I had kept control of my earnings. John had suggested sending my salary home monthly, but I refused. On my own in the city, I needed the security of a growing savings account to feel at ease. Near dinner time, and with John still not home, Betty was in the kitchen when she got a phone call. Smiling, she changed outfits and hurried out. I had enough time in the afternoon to collect myself. Afterward, I followed Betty to a fancy restaurant. Seeing the wealthy clientele, I roughly estimated a meal here would cost at least a few grand. John was willing to spend on them, yet he never brought me to such upscale places. We even borrowed from my parents to pay for our wedding banquet, giving him face while I endured all the hardship. Having been married to him for years, I knew John's personality well. He cared a lot about appearances. In our early years, relatives looked down on him for driving taxis. He frequently changed jobs, and we barely saved any money. I was mainly supporting our household then. After pulling some strings and eventually putting in some effort, John got a management position at a small company in town. The pay wasn't high, but it let him hold his head up among relatives. Since then, Betty always claimed her son worked at a big company, managing hundreds. Later, I learned it was just a middle management job and his paycheck was less than half of mine. Today seemed to be a special day for John and them. The table was filled with dishes, and there was a cake too. Turns out, it was Richard's birthday, their son. Gina wore a light green dress with an elegant updo. Beside her was John, in a sharp suit. With their son, they looked the picture-perfect family. Looking down at myself, despite tidying up, I couldn't hide my frumpy appearance. Dry hair, sallow, loose skin, and the bags under my eyes from countless late nights and overtime made me completely out of place here. Maybe to remind me about the unpaid house, John came home early next morning. He had even made an effort, bringing gifts. I never imagined this. After all these years, he barely ever gave me gifts, but now he dropped a few hundred on a necklace. "Honey, I was so busy yesterday. How are you feeling?" John approached with a smile, trying to hug me. This time, I didn't evade him, instead peering at the flowers and gifts with feigned surprise and gratitude. "What's this? For me?" With my softened demeanor, John's expression relaxed a lot. "Told you, there's no way Jenny would find out about Gina and me. Yesterday was just my imagination." The familiar inner voice mocked me, unchanged, still full of disdain. I accepted the gift with a smile. "Thanks, John. I still feel a bit off today. How about you accompany me to the doctor?" John frowned slightly. "You're unwell again? What's wrong this time? Don't waste money on small things. Just take some meds." I laughed coldly to myself. Willing to splash on Gina's dinner, but stingy over my doctor's visit. Honestly, if it weren't for discovering this special ability by accident, I'd likely stay ignorant, focused only on earning money for a house. I might never have realized he had been cheating on me. My stomach, it keeps hurting on and off. No, it's not a lie. For a while, my stomach, especially my lower abdomen, hurt a lot at night. At first, I thought it was just my period, but when I realized it wasn't, I just took some painkillers and got back to work. After I finished talking, John stayed silent for a while. When I looked up, he seemed deep in thought. Then, his thoughts hit me hard. Could it be a side effect of the meds from back then? Nah, can't be. The hospital didn't find anything back then, and it's been so long now, she won't figure it out. The master said that Jenny's baby would clash with Gina's baby. Good thing that got handled early, or the family line would have ended with me. I stared at him, confused, like a bomb had just gone off in my head. I couldn't make sense of it. Was that tonic back then not for stabilizing the pregnancy? Was it something else? I blinked, feeling a sudden chill run down my spine. Fear crept all over me. Memories flashed of Gina coming back with Richard, just months after I lost my baby. She showed up, crying about being dumped and shunned by her family. I had just lost my child, and seeing Richard brought out my sympathy. I offered them a place to stay, not realizing my own child was taken from me by those I showed kindness to. My baby must hate me for helping those who caused her harm. No wonder she's never visited me in my dreams all these years. The man in front of me, John, was someone I truly liked, someone I spent so many years with. Turns out, he had been scheming against me since our marriage. I was born in a small town as the third child, with 2 older brothers and a younger brother. I was the only girl. My parents' favoritism left me timid and self-conscious. When I lost the baby, I faced the pain in silence, thinking it was an accident caused by misguided advice from Betty. I didn't expect it was all their calculated plan. John sensed my intense gaze on him and snapped back with a familiar smile. "What's up?" Staring at me like that, don't you like the gift? I shook my head, my voice dry as I spoke. Last night, I dreamt of our child. A child? I nodded, letting out a bitter laugh. Yeah, the baby we accidentally lost. In my dream, the baby called me Mom, with a soft voice. John seemed startled by my seemingly random words, paused, and then comforted me. Don't overthink it. It was just a dream. What's gone is gone. Why bring up the past? My son is the cutest anyway. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to tear him apart, and turned to the room. I don't feel well. We'll talk about the house later. You go get busy. John paused, realizing something was off, but maybe was too lazy to deal with it, or doubtless he thought he had me wrapped around his finger. He eventually left. After discovering such an enormous truth, I didn't break down as I thought I would. Instead, I felt a chilling calmness. I sat in the room for hours, then called Sandy, the business owner lady. Aren't you busy buying a house? How do you have time to call me? Sandy's voice, as loud and teasing as ever, brought back my hidden emotions, and I started sobbing uncontrollably. Sandy, surprised, quickly asked what happened. Once I stabilized my emotions, I told Sandy everything that happened lately, except for me being able to read John's mind. Sandy, 10 years older, had been through a lot. She got divorced and returned to her southern hometown to build a life with her daughter. I met her when her factory was just starting. I witnessed her growth and the factory's development over years. Because of this bond, Sandy trusted me entirely. Over the years, I grew beyond being just a worker, thanks to her, gaining knowledge and skills. But because John never cared about what I did at work, he still thought I was just a worker earning some average pay. So, what's your plan? Divorce? Sandy asked seriously. I chuckled bitterly. Divorce is definitely happening, but not before John pays for what he did. Sandy laughed heartily. Jenny, that's the spirit. Where's the sharp mind you use in the factory? If you had used even a fraction of it at home, you wouldn't have been bullied like this. Tell me, what do you need help with? I've got your back. That was what I was waiting for. Sandy had grown her business alone. Her connections and tactics were beyond what I imagined. She had invested in multiple projects apart from our factory. John, on the other hand, daydreamed about easy money and took everything of mine for granted. By now, it's enough to buy a house outright, and I'm going to take it all back. After discussing with Sandy, I asked her to set a trap for John. Sandy assured me she would handle it. In no time, she sent a project proposal. It was for developing a resort. Sandy once almost got scammed by this plan. The land wasn't authorized for construction, and when reported, the project was shut down. Those who invested lost everything. I know John well. He's just like me in terms of education, but unlike me, he's been stagnant. With the surface data done well, tricking him would be a piece of cake. A few days later, Betty returned, bringing Gina and her son along. Jenny, you don't look well, Gina greeted with a smile, pretending to be concerned. I knew how drained I looked. But that's okay. Soon, it'll be their turn. Didn't get much rest. Why are you all here? Gina's expression didn't change a bit. It's not like you have many chances to come back. I just wanted to see you. Saying that, she warmly took my hand and subtly started hinting about buying a house. John mentioned you weren't feeling well at the sales center. Feeling better now? I sighed and shook my head. Not really. I was hoping he'd accompany me to see a doctor. By the way, Gina, do you have any money? I need to borrow some for my treatment. Gina was caught off guard by my sudden change of topic to borrowing money, and her smile froze. But soon enough, she was back to normal. Aren't you the one with money? I don't think my little savings could help much. I feigned worry. You know, sis, all my money went into buying the house. Now I'm really short on cash for treatment, and he won't even come with me. Gina's smile was becoming strained. Every time she tried to change the subject, I brought it back to borrowing money. Eventually, I managed to get 5,000 out of her. Anyone would be upset losing that amount unexpectedly. Gina quickly made an excuse to escape into the kitchen. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a rock flew straight towards my forehead. Startled, I dodged in time, and seeing the big dent it left in the ground chilled me. Looking across, I saw John's 8-year-old illegitimate son, Richard, making faces at me. "Old hag, that's what you get for bullying my mom. Serves you right," he taunted, ready to throw stones again. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I picked up the rock he'd thrown and hurled it back at him. Hit him right on the wrist, making him bawl instantly. His cries brought Betty and Gina rushing from the kitchen. Betty was beside herself seeing her grandson crying. "What happened to your hand? Who did this to you?" Richard, with tears and snot all over his face, accused me loudly. "It was her, that wicked woman. She hit me. Mom, beat her up. Beat her to death." Gina, her eyes red, looked at me. "Richard's just a kid. Even if he did something wrong, you could have just talked to him. Why did you have to hit him?" I was wondering why Gina suddenly changed her tone when John's voice came from outside. "Jenny, you hurt a kid, what's wrong with you?" John stormed over to stand by Gina, angrily questioning me. I narrowed my eyes at the pair, who seemed a perfect match, and slowly spoke. "Why are you so worked up? Richard isn't even your son. Also, I'm your wife. Standing next to Gina like that, what would people say?" John's eyes flickered with guilt but quickly steadied. Could Jenny really have figured it out? Recognizing his thoughts, I smirked. Of course, I'd figured it out. Looking back, I couldn't believe how blind I was to their obvious chemistry. Gina maintained an innocent front, her tears flowing easily now that John was here, looking pitiful. "This is about you bullying a kid. Don't change the subject. Damn woman bringing me trouble. If he's hurt, you wait and see what I'll do to you." I pointed at the rock, bigger than a fist, and sneered. A kid wouldn't throw something this heavy at someone's head. Gina chimed in. "Sister, stop spouting nonsense. Richard is obedient. He wouldn't do such a thing." "Richard wouldn't, but I'd be heartless enough. If I was, why didn't I aim to kill?" Gina looked stunned, never having seen this sarcastic side of me, her face reddening as she struggled to respond. I stopped bothering with their antics and just left. For the next few days, I stayed at a hotel. Didn't hear about Gina and her kid again until 3 days later. Turns out, during those days at my house, Richard had been with local kids up the mountain to catch birds. He unknowingly stepped on an animal trap hidden in the woods. By the time they got him to the hospital, his leg was a bloody mess, and they said he might be disabled for life. Hearing that news, I couldn't help but laugh. No one knew I orchestrated the whole thing. Over the years, Gina often brought Richard to John's hometown. After some time, Richard started playing with the village kids. They loved going up the mountain, but since Richard was chubby and unfamiliar with the area, he often got lost. Just like this time. That evening, I watched from a distance as Richard got separated from the others. Once alone, I swiftly set up the trap. Only after I heard his scream did I leave. Animal traps injuring people happen often enough around the village. No one would suspect. The village kids know the mountain, what's safe or not. But not Richard. Being city-raised, spoilt, and only on a whim went bird catching. No surprise he'd get lost or hurt. When Richard was hurt, the house was gloomy, and folks couldn't help but gossip seeing how much John cared for him. I chose a bright sunny day to return home. The moment I entered, there was John, looking a mess in the living room. Seeing me, his eyes lit up. "You're finally back." John tried everything to contact me but to no avail, while I played the role of a disappointed, broken-hearted woman. I softened my tone. "Why do you look like this? I was only gone a few days. She just needed some space." I should have known she'd come back on her own, he thought, relieved. My priority now is to get her money for my son's treatment. So that's his plan. I smirked, ready with a story. Got some good news for you. We're about to hit it big. John hesitated, incredulous. What are you talking about? You know my friend from ages ago? She's rich now, owns a company. We just got back in touch. She gave me a great tip on an investment. I've put money into this project. It's already underway, and soon we're gonna see returns. John looked skeptical. You better not get scammed. Seeing his doubt, I pulled out the business proposal Sandy prepared, explaining everything to him clearly. Slowly, he started to loosen up, excitement showing. But when he learned I invested all the $600K meant for our house, disbelief and anger surged through him. $600K? You just invested all of it? That was for buying our house. Are you stupid? Even if it's foolproof, you can't just throw it all in like that. I tried to calm him down, showing him the gains on my phone over the past few days. Babe, look at this growth. There's no way we're gonna lose money. Give it a month or so, who knows how much our $600,000 will turn into. Why the rush? John was staring at the phone, his eyes lit up with excitement. He knew exactly what this could mean. Turn $600,000 into a few million? Unbelievable. Jenny, that clueless woman, actually has a big shot friend like this. Guess I can't cut ties with her just yet. Hearing John's thoughts, I smiled to myself. Sandy once said, to bring them down, you first have to make them crazy. Over the next few days, John was all about researching the investment I made. The more he dug into it, the greedier he got. Once he realized I was out of cash, he couldn't let go of this golden opportunity, wanting to throw all he had into it. Naturally, he couldn't spare much for Richard's surgery. I overheard him on the phone several times, always trying to reassure Gina. In the end, poor Gina was left with no choice but to hustle for money, lowering herself to ask others. One day, she came to me, having asked to meet in the mall where she worked. Jenny, I really need the $5,000 I lent you earlier. Richard's surgery is really urgent. Can you help? Gina said softly, her eyes red with worry. In just a week, she'd lost her spark, sleepless nights and anxiety had aged her. Meanwhile, I was doing well, feeling great and looking healthier. Gina, I sighed, I heard about Richard. Life's so unpredictable. How could such an accident happen? You know I've been under the weather myself, and John's tied up with investments right now. I honestly don't have the money. Gina looked at me, skepticism clear in her eyes, still pleading. Seeing her persistence, I decided to hit her with a stronger dose of reality. I acted all cute and shared little stories about John and me to get under her skin further. Clearly, it worked. In the face of her son's trouble and our complications, she had no energy left to spar with me and quickly retreated. Watching her leave, I chuckled, guessing she was off to confront John. When I got home, John looked furious. His familiar inner voice kicked in. God, when did Gina become so annoying? I told her I'm investing, just wait a bit longer, but she insists on causing a scene. If she ruins my plans, she's gonna have it coming. I just listened quietly, unchanged. This is what men are like, especially John. Whether it's me, his wife of over 10 years, or Gina, who bore him a son, he'd ditch us both if his interests were threatened. A self-centered jerk like that deserves to be stuck in mud, ending up somewhere no one remembers. Betty genuinely loves her grandson. She's been at the hospital day and night, not caring about gossip, just focused on him. Seeing me back, John eagerly shared his latest discovery. The market's booming. I'm thinking of putting more money in. We could not only pay off that house but maybe even get a villa. I agreed with everything, even suggesting he borrow money to invest. John spent some minutes weighing it but soon dived in head first. Inside, I was thrilled, then went to my room and gave Sandy a brief update on the situation. If we're gonna draw John all the way in, the plan needs to be rock solid. From the start, Sandy had someone pose as the project leader to chat with John. Now, over a month in, and with the project going live, John wanted to visit the site himself, and Sandy agreed. Time passed, and John returned in high spirits. Sandy said John's initial investment had already profited quite a bit. Seeing him like this, I knew it was time to reel him in. Without a doubt, after confirming this was a sure win, my purpose was fulfilled, and John's attitude towards me plummeted. Day by day, he couldn't even be bothered to put up a front, openly being rude, and going out to see Gina and his son without shame. One morning, I was startled awake by a commotion. Opening the door, I saw Richard limping, rage-filled in the living room. It was a mess. The coffee table was shattered, the TV broken, and the floor was a chaos of debris. Seeing me, Richard got even more worked up. "You nasty woman, get out of my house. My mom said you're the shameless mistress who seduced my dad for years. Have you no shame?" Looks like I went too easy on him that day. A mere injury didn't cut it. Before I could speak, Gina walked in. After months, she'd regained her former grace, with an extra air of satisfaction. She approached Richard, wiping his sweat with a smile. "Didn't Mom tell you to be polite to Auntie?" Her voice was apologetic, but her eyes carried an undeniable challenge. But we had a role to play. Over time, I'd mastered performing in front of them. What is this supposed to mean? Why is Richard calling me a mistress, and why is he calling John Dad? I looked at Gina, eyes wide with disbelief, tears almost appearing, and even seemed about to collapse. Gina, pleased with my act, couldn't keep up her facade any longer. She chuckled and stepped forward. "Didn't you see? Being called a mistress, well, isn't it true? After all, someone unloved is just that. As for Richard, of course, he's John's child." She turned toward John, who'd appeared at the door without me noticing. "Isn't that right?" Richard saw John and excitedly leaped into his arms. "Dad, you're finally back. Kick this bad woman out. Grandma said everything here is mine now. We're rich, every trace of her has to go." John caught Richard's chubby form with a smile. "Whatever my son says goes. If you want it out, toss it out." Even as I looked at him with utter resentment and shock, there wasn't a flicker of remorse on John's face. Things have gotten to a point where I definitely need to make things official with Gina. "Jenny, if you're smart, just leave quietly. I'll even throw some money your way." Once I said that, the room got a lot quieter. The person across the room looked down on me, as if the moment I said no, they'd rip me apart. "Fine, but I want my 60 grand back." Gina and John were stunned by how quickly I agreed. They didn't expect it. They hurriedly got me to sign the papers as soon as they snapped out of it. "Get the paperwork done at the registry in a few days. I'll let you stay here for a bit longer." John grinned like everything was sunshine and rainbows, handing over the 60 grand without batting an eye. What he didn't know was that I never actually put any money into this scheme in the first place. "So, this 60 grand? It's coming from the money he initially invested." Investment returns take time, and during that time, John kept pouring more and more money into it, about 100K in total, including loans. But he never really did the math, just blindly throwing money at it. The liquid money John has now, after giving me 60 grand and his recent big spending, isn't much left. So, with my 60 grand out, I now had 120K. Watching John and his crew leave, satisfied with achieving their goals, I chuckled. I didn't want to stay a minute longer in that place. After packing my things, I sat in the car and left. Once I checked into a hotel in the city, I called Sandy. "Sandy, that idiot is still throwing money into it. Just wait, when the news breaks that the project fails, he'll regret it." Rather than him ending up drowning in debt, I wanted him to live the rest of his life under a cloud of fear. So I said, "It's not enough yet. I want him to suffer more." Years of understanding made Sandy instantly get my drift, teasing with a mischievous grin. Jenny, I didn't expect you to be more ruthless than me. I like it. Hearing Sandy's teasing, I smiled. I just want them to suffer as much as possible. Their misery is the only thing that makes me feel a bit better. Whenever I think of the child they schemed and caused the loss of, my anger is overwhelming. Alright, leave it to me. But when this is all over, you better come back and work hard for me. Follow my lead, and there'll be no end to the men you can attract when you've made money with me. Sandy noticed I was not in a great mood and managed to pull me out of my despair with a casual tone. I knew how off I was, but Sandy spotted it and threw me a lifeline. Tears streamed down. Ever since I married John, I hadn't felt such obvious warmth for a long time. Growing up, there was no place for me at home. After marriage, I was belittled and schemed against. Looking back at the first half of my life, things never seemed to go well. But this period taught me that some things need to be changed on your own. If you don't change, you'll be stuck and waste your life away. Another month passed before John and I officially divorced with no ties left. From about 2 weeks ago, John's investments have doubled. He borrowed from loan sharks because of my setup. A lump sum of several $100,000, not paying back could practically cost a life. Once someone tastes the sweetness of desire, the greedy devil named greed inside can completely devour them. John, enjoy your few good days. That day, Gina sent me a message, inviting me back for her wedding with John. Looking at the flirty messages she sent, I didn't respond, putting on the act of a despairing woman abandoned by her ex. Still, I intend to go. Missing the show they're about to put on would be a shame. The wedding was at the biggest hotel in the city, and the guests were familiar faces, chatting and whispering with smiles. Perhaps I've changed so much in these past months that not even the relatives recognized me. I found a quiet place to sit and listened with interest. John got lucky. Heard he's got some connections from somewhere and invested in a big project, making loads. But he's heartless, just made it big and kicked Jenny to the curb. If it were me, I'd find someone young and pretty too. John's such a champ. Got an 8-year-old kid even before he divorced Jenny. If it were your wife, she'd have cut you up. Laughter mixed with talks mostly about John's sudden prosperity. The wedding venue was pure luxury, but how long can John's loans last? Without seeing any returns, he kept borrowing more to maintain his lavish lifestyle. Today was supposed to be his payday. As the MC announced the newlyweds' entrance, John's grin grew smugly. Let's sincerely wish this new couple. Before the MC could finish, the doors to the banquet hall burst open, and a crowd stormed in. Debt collectors. They heard the projects bust and wanted to settle scores. Loan sharks live on the edge, not exactly looking like wedding guests. One glance and you'd know they weren't invited. Some guests started to panic, whispering nervously. Who are these people? Not from the bride's side, right? What do you mean? The groom doesn't have such shady relatives either. They look like trouble. They really were here to cause trouble. Watching the scene, I couldn't help but smile. Seeing his wedding ruined by strangers, John's anger hit the roof. Who are you? Where's security? Get them out. The tattooed leader spat. When are you paying back our money? I heard your project manager ran off with the funds. Now the project's dead, what are you going to pay us with? John was stunned. When he realized who had arrived, he felt a little embarrassed. Oh, it's my big brother. You should have told me you were coming. Waiter, add a few chairs. The tattooed man saw John avoiding the question, and his anger grew. Who said we're here for your wedding? We're here to collect the debt. John glanced at the restless guests below. His old face flushed with embarrassment. He had to pause the ceremony and pull the tattooed man aside. Who told you my project failed? We'll break even today. I'll definitely pay you back then. The tattooed man said, can our info be wrong? The person has fled abroad, and the money is gone. I'm telling you, if you don't pay today, I'll take an arm off. John knew how informed they were in their line of work. He had a bad feeling and clumsily took out his phone to contact the project manager. But his number was blocked everywhere. Only then did John realize he had been scammed. John was dumbfounded for a long time. The tattooed man, seeing his silence, grew more furious and slapped him across the face. The sharp sound of the slap seemed to trigger something at the wedding. The crowd became even more agitated, rushing to leave. Soon, everyone scattered, while I hid in the corner, continuing to enjoy the spectacle. John, thin and frail, took a while to recover after being knocked to the ground. Gina screamed, pushed the tattooed man away, and helped John up. "Who are you to hit my husband? Where's security? Call security. Keep shouting, and I'll hit you too." The moment he said this, Gina, who had been yelling, quieted down considerably. Betty was comforting a crying Richard. Witnessing all this, she didn't dare to make a move. At that moment, John spotted me with sharp eyes. He grew excited. "It's her. This woman got me into the project. Go after her for the money. She knows something." The crowd's eyes fell on me. The tattooed man squinted and walked over. Seeing that I was exposed, I boldly stepped forward and introduced myself. "My name is Jenny, the ex-wife John ditched after getting rich. Just to be clear, I don't know anything." John, covering his bleeding mouth, shouted anxiously, "She's lying. Her friend introduced me to the project. She definitely knows the details." The tattooed man sized me up and gave John another slap. "Shut up. I have my mind, I'll ask myself." Gina glared at me with anger but said nothing, while John, after being slapped twice, quieted down. His once handsome face looked even more swollen. "You know the project manager?" I shook my head. "Nope. John handled all the communication. I never met anyone. Plus, my friend blocked me long ago and is now untraceable." The tattooed man, half skeptical, took my phone and examined it thoroughly. Finding nothing useful, he angrily kicked John twice more, leaving him unable to get up. "Stalling for time? Are you kidding me? Guys, hit him." The scene got chaotic. Even Gina couldn't escape the chaos. What was supposed to be a beautiful wedding had turned into a farce. Betty screamed, trying to pull off the guys beating John, but was pushed down, crying and rolling on the floor. "Call the cops. They're beating people." The cops? Would John dare? If the police got involved, these guys would only get more brutal. Even if the cops intervened, they'd maybe lock them up for a few days, and afterward, it'd be worse for John. John, beaten to the point of exhaustion, lay on the ground half dead, like a dog. Once they realized they wouldn't get the money today, the thug crew actually dislocated John's arm. His blood-curdling scream echoed in the hall, and he passed out from the pain. Despite the commotion, no staff came to stop them. I could only marvel at the gang's influence in the area. I sincerely wished the newlyweds happiness in their future together. Honestly. After spending a few more days in town, I packed up my things and returned to Sandy. Just off the airport, the hotel where I stayed called unexpectedly. Apparently, John couldn't find me and contacted where I stayed instead. I was about to tell the front desk to ignore him when John's furious voice came through. "Jenny. Was this your doing? Did you set me up?" I laughed. "Too bad you're only catching on now. It's too late. Where the hell are you? Get back here. Give me the 60 grand from the divorce to help me out." I was shocked at John's shamelessness. We were divorced, so what makes him think he can still order me around like before? "John, why on earth would I save the man who abandoned me? You think I adore you so much? I'm not Gina, I don't love you. I wish you'd drop dead." John was stunned, and his heavy breathing came over the phone. He probably didn't understand how I'd become so strong and ruthless. In his mind, I was still the timid woman who blindly worked through problems. He wanted to say more, but I couldn't be bothered. Sandy was keeping me busy with lots of work, no time for irrelevant people. As months went by, memories of John faded, but my deep-seated resentment lingered. When I heard news of him again, it was about Richard's death. Gina and John's illegitimate son was gone. Honestly, I was surprised. Didn't see that coming. Richard's demise relieved some long-held anger inside me. Word was, after being hounded by debt collectors, Gina couldn't bear it and tried fleeing with her son. They were caught by John and his mom during their escape, and a car tragically ran over Richard. John's mom fainted from shock, and after resuscitation, suffered a stroke. Gina, having watched her son turn to roadkill, grew mentally unstable. With an arm lost in that confrontation, John was left living a pitiful life. He didn't die, but life's weight was suffocating him. All the agony he caused me was now his own damn karma. 3 years passed. I climbed to a managerial role in the company. Today, I took some time to return for my brother's son's wedding. Family kindly welcomed me and mentioned John in passing. Turns out he lost a leg later and became wholly disabled. He relied on collecting garbage for survival. The relatives who once flattered him now kept their distance, especially those unfortunate enough to lend him money, deeming him bad luck. After the wedding, I drove to my hotel and at a red light, saw a familiar figure among the crowd, John. Kneeling and begging, he was frail and pitiful, a shadow of who he was. Sensing my gaze, he looked over, and I met his eyes, then turned away coldly. John, confused, scrambled to gather his things and staggered out of sight. Watching him, I realized my hatred had long faded. Whatever ability let me hear his thoughts once, it felt like a dream now. But I knew that without that strange talent, my life wouldn't be so free and joyful today. His silhouette blurred as I drove away. Not kicking him while he's down was my last spark of mercy.